But let's talk about the big picture. How's it going? And do you feel like giving the intensity of this climate right now, where we just played this clip, and why not play it one more time, Mr. Paul? This is Eric Holder, 6A, yesterday. Go ahead.
It is time for us as Democrats to be as tough as they are, to be as dedicated as they are, to be as committed as they are. Michelle always says, Michelle Obama, I love her, she and my wife, like, really tight, which always scares me and Barack. But Michelle always says that, when they go low, we go high. No. When they go low, we kick them.
All right, that's good. We get the point. And the applauding of the we kick 'em, the clear implication of, I used to think you weren't supposed to have calls for violence. I understand, Eric Holder. I don't think it literally means kick 'em, but it's hard to tell the difference with over 500 examples of violence against Trump and Trump supporters that we've documented. Breitbart News, Dr. G. We have to fight. We have to understand our history. You have to feel like in this particular news cycle we're in right now that your book is pretty well timed.
Well, yeah, thank you, Alex, and thank you for the kind words. Yes, I think the title, Why We Fight, I'm not a psychic, but it couldn't have been better timed. It's quite shocking that, this man, who is the only ever Attorney General in the history of the United States to be held in contempt of Congress, thinks that this is the time to double down on the message of the Democrats. And there's only one conclusion that your listeners can draw, that these people are normalizing the use of intimidation and violence against those who disagree with themselves. This isn't just, the odd case of a mob getting out of control. This is when the key leading lights on the left actually telegraph in advance that this is what we will do to you. So, you hear it every couple of years that this is the most important election in your lifetime. And November is, because it's a question of, do we hand over the institutional reins of power to the mob, or do we send a message to them that we will no longer put up with these tactics?
Yes. And so are we going to put up with these tactics? I don't know the answer to that, Dr. G. And I think that it was inevitable that what the left tries to do, it seems like from my vantage point, is they do try to win with the whatever is the most polite tactic they can. And as they continue to lose, they start ratcheting up the rhetoric until we're in full totalitarian authoritarian mode. That seems to be the historical precedent. If you've got a Barack Obama who can sell the soap, if you will, and try to convince people that the Democratic Party is the way to go, then they'll try it that way, and they'll talk a big game about civility. But then once they start losing election after election, and they've lost 30-odd governorships, 30-odd states in the Electoral College, now all of a sudden they got to take the gloves off. They got to become more ruthless. And this seems to follow a pattern historically.
It does, absolutely. It's done so since the invention of the modern left-wing political identity. And it's very simple to understand why it's all, you said ratcheting up. Absolutely. They always dial it to 10. Why do they do that? Because they have made their own peace with a very, very dangerous formulation. They believe that they are in the right. Both sides believes that they're in the right. The difference between us and them is they believe that they're accessing power, their goal justifies any means possible. And that's the difference. We stand by the founding principles of the Republic. We stand by representative government.
Yes.
These individuals couldn't care less. They couldn't, and Kavanaugh is all the proof you need. They knew that he was a good man. I mean,
yes.
Everybody knew.
Everyone knew.
Everybody knew. This guy was a Boy Scout. And they said, doesn't matter. Got to destroy him because we lost the election and we need the Supreme Court. That's the calculation they made. And it's not an immoral one, Alex. It is an amoral one. There's a psychopathy there in that decision that we can do whatever we want.
Yes, and this is where I note that in the American left, and I do think that this is the case throughout the world, the premium value, the number one paramount value, is immediate political victory. It's not their creed, it's not their career, it's not their family, it's not any bigger picture, it's not even playing the long game the way I think I like to play the long game. Of course, it's hard not to get invested in short-term outcomes like the Judge Kavanaugh appointment and confirmation to Justice Kavanaugh. I admit I do get invested emotionally, but overall, I would like to play a long game here. The left is not playing that. The left is playing you must win today. That is the game plan. And I think that is there's yet another example of it with this Kavanaugh witch trial that we saw. But Dr. G, this is sort of what I'm reading. And again, as I noted, I'm only about a quarter of the way through. I'll have completed the book the next time we talk. But it shows that your philosophy, which got you all the way into the White House, in terms of your view on war and asymmetric warfare, is rooted in history. And you talk about a personal history of your dad being a prisoner in Hungary, and really drawing from all aspects of history. This is the first portion of the book goes into this, and maybe it's the entirety of the book, but certainly the first portion. It is rooted in study and thought. It's not rooted in some sort of immediacy and some sort of a pop philosophy, pop politic, fly-by-night viewpoint. It is rooted in study.
Well, thank you. I try to make the book as accessible as possible, and to ground it in reality and in objective truth. And the irony of the left, which is a product of the Hegelian dialectic as perverted by Karl Marx, their whole philosophy is based upon a concept of history that sees human evolution or the history of mankind as a constant progression to perfection. That's just detached from reality. I mean, totally. that utopian view of how humankind has prospered for the last 6,000 years is so utterly detached from reality. The idea that we're constantly progressing. If that's the case, we wouldn't have had the Balkan Wars after the end of the Cold War, with 400,000 people murdered on the doorstep of Europe. So you can only do what they do in terms of dehumanizing your political opponents. You can only do what they do, for example, to people like Justice Kavanaugh, if you are utterly detached from reality. And I'm not being a chicken little about this. This is a serious, observation. Right now, the evolution, the trajectory of their behavior could get very, very unpleasant very rapidly, because in all the things they've done in the last 2 years, they demonstrate one thing. They have no understanding why Donald Trump was elected. They do not know who the deplorables are, and they have no understanding of the MAGA message. Therefore, they will misread the American people again and again and again until they go too far.
Dr. Sebastian Gorka, he is a Fox News contributor, author of the new book, Why We Fight, and also Defeating Jihad, another good book that is out there. And Dr. G, do you read the book also on audiobook? Because I know a lot of us are audiophiles in this audience.
I insisted. I refused to sign the contract. Last time they only let me read the first chapter. I said to my publishers, I'm not writing a book unless I get to do the whole audiobook. So yes, it's out there. I did the whole thing. Took me 3 days, and it's on Audible, and I think iTunes as well.
That is amazing, and I don't want you guys to miss any of this radio show for the book. But it is, I love hearing Dr. G talk, so that's a great thing. So I might have to pick up that version as well. That sounds super cool. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the news, because there are a number of international issues that have gotten pushed by the wayside. One thing, the director Christopher Wray of the FBI gave some interesting revelations yesterday. One of them is that the FBI is investigating 5,000 terror cases worldwide, including 1,000 in the U.S. He's concerned about drones being used to attack the United States, not just from ISIS and Al-Qaeda, but from MS-13 as well. What did you make of these new revelations from the FBI?
They don't surprise me. If you look at the unclassified reporting that's out there, it's very clear that the terrorist threat has not gone away. ISIS ISIS is not in the news because its caliphate has been crushed, but Al-Qaeda is very, very busy, especially in Afghanistan and also Africa. With regards to the new threats you discussed, yes, absolutely. Just look at the open source reporting on what Russia has been doing with very, very cheap drones in the Ukraine when they invaded Crimea. So this is if you know where to look, if you follow the right reporters and the people that work for Francis Martel on your site, you can see these trends. But it's nice to have somebody who is in a position of government responsibility, talk about these and confirm these trends for us. So these things are real, but they shouldn't be exaggerated.
So one other thing that's captivated a fair bit of media attention is this journalist that was detained at the Saudi Arabian embassy. I believe it was in Turkey, and this is I think this caught a lot of people off guard, and the expectation, I think, is that the President Trump does something in order to retaliate against Saudi Arabia, whose relations with the president have seemed to have improved during the Trump years. But provide some context for me, Dr. G. What are we seeing here, and beyond what meets the eye?
This story, and you always, the rule one of war, the first reports from the battlefield are always wrong. So let's wait a little bit to find out exactly who was where. First things first, this has to be understood in the broader context of the geopolitical shifts in the region, the Muslim world, in the last 5 years, and what Turkey is doing, how Turkey is becoming a theological, a theocratic nation once more, how the legacy of Atatürk, who secularized the modern Turkish state, has been dismantled by Erdogan, who's really creating kind of his own Turkish version of the Muslim Brotherhood, is now in competition with the other leading Sunni nation, Saudi Arabia, because Turkey has painted itself into a corner geopolitically with its stance against America, its very problematic attitudes to its responsibilities within NATO. So there's a political and at times a hot war in the region with regards to who's going to be the top dog in the Sunni Muslim world, and potentially this individual who, truth be told, had some nefarious contact himself. This wasn't an individual who was as pure as the driven snow.
Sure.
This individual may have been caught in the crossfire between these two competing Sunni Muslim nations.
Well, it is a Washington Post journalist, though, and it is a big deal when any American journalist, regardless of if their peer is the driven snow, gets detained against their will by a foreign entity. And so they are going to put some pressure on the president to do something in this regard. Do you have any anticipation on how things will shake out here?
I'm not going to try and predict. I think sooner or later the president will take some overt action. I'm sure things are being done behind the scenes right now, but it's impossible to predict because the administration in Ankara has really repeatedly in at least the last 2 years constantly made the wrong strategic decisions. They have literally painted themselves into a corner when it comes to their strategic choices. They've chosen very bad bedfellows for themselves. And as such, they're not necessarily predictable in terms of the classic rational actor. So Erdogan, like the Democrats, he could dial it to 11.
Okay, Dr. Sebastian Gorka, rapid fire, a few more big issues that are out there. First of all, Nikki Haley departing from the UN. There's a lot of hot takes flying around. It doesn't shock me. She's someone who I was not a fan of going into the UN. I thought she did a good job in her role. I didn't think she'd be there forever. But what am I supposed to be outraged? Am I supposed to be thrilled? Am I supposed to be somewhere in between? It just seems like another news story, but one without any major lasting implication. Yeah, your thoughts?
I think your final option there is the right one. This is not important. I mean, it's really not how the mainstream, fake news industrial complex generates so much lighten the heat from stories which really must be taken at face value. And I've seen it amongst conservatives as well.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Conservatives are doing this.
They immediately put on their tinfoil hats and, was she the author of Anonymous? I mean, really absurd, permutations of the real scenario. Just watch the video from the Oval Office of the presser. He's giving her a presser in the Oval Office. He's not firing her by tweet like.
Good point.
And watch the body language. Okay, whatever this woman did in the past, these are two people who work well with each other, like each other. It was warm. It was cordial. This is not some sudden, capricious decision by the president. She wanted to do this, and that's fine. You know as well as anybody, jobs in the administration, doesn't matter who's the president, eat you alive. Whether you're at the NSC, whether you're at the UN, whether you're in the intelligence community, if you're a senior political appointee, 2 years is a pretty good stint.
It's standard. It's not too long. It's not too short. That's a standard. Run. And Nikki Haley, unlike, and Dr. G, you don't need to comment on this part, but it's important for me to mention this stuff for the audience because I don't want to get you in trouble, particularly if the band gets back together at some point soon. But there are folks who went into the White House, Gary Cohn and H.R. McMaster come to mind, who I think brought a globalist worldview, and then they tried to implement a globalist worldview despite MAGA, and I think they ended up leaving, and it was not as they did not get the fanfare Nikki Haley got, and for good reason. And then you had Nikki Haley, who came in, I think, also with a globalist worldview, but implemented MAGA at the UN, and thus she got a nice send off. Again, all confirming this all seems fine to me. Again, I'm not a Nikki Haley fan. I can't imagine that she'll be my pick for president if she runs in 2024. But this is not. It just doesn't seem like a big deal to me.
It is a perfect interpretation of the events. I subscribe to it. And at the end of the day, somebody stepping down from the position of UN ambassador, it's not a news story. It's just not a news story. That's what administrations do. So, we're not going to see the last of her. She'll be around in conservative politics. But, the idea that this is a big deal, as long as John Bolton, as long as Mattis, as long as Pompeo, as long as General Dunford are where they are, the MAGA train will keep on,
very good. Last topic for today, Dr. G, I'm just going to make it very broad, is China. There is so many China headlines. The Google teaming with China, China infiltrating our technology with these microchips. And it seems like with some of our tech elite were aware of it and did their best to keep it a secret because they knew the government would be concerned. China legalizing transformation of internment camps for Muslim Uyghurs. I mean, China is just one bad news story after the next, and finally it's starting to trip people's sensor. But this is bleak.
Oh, it is. And, we have to thank the president and his team for finally shedding light on the nature of this administration and this government in Beijing. This is a one-party state. This is not a nation. I mean, forget what Kissinger sold us, which, the idea that with economic liberalization, you must have also political liberalization. Not true. China is a counterexample. But the good news is for all the listeners that China has blinked. If you look at their reaction to the tariffs and how they're backing down, that they may be petulant the foreign minister may be petulant in front of Mike Pompeo, but he sat there like the Cheshire cat, as cool as ice, because he knows we have the upper hand. So, they are the only strategic threat we really face. I write about this in Why We Fight. But we have a plan, the president has a plan, and they are already starting to blink.
Good. A perfect way to round out the segment, and I'm sure I will hit the China segment by the time of your book, by the time we speak again. Why We Fight is out now, Defeating America's Enemies with No Apologies. Dr. Sebastian Gorka, always a pleasure.
My pleasure was mine. God bless you, Alex, and the listeners.
Thank you, sir.